Good evening all and welcome. We're going to skip the comp this week and just have more fresh content for October. So I hope you enjoy joining me in the haunted woods for this collection of stories. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I try and do distance hikes when I can. It's what keeps my head straight. Sometimes that means getting up really early or staying out too late to squeeze in more miles. More than a few times I found myself walking alone through the woods, with nothing but a dim headlamp in pitch dark. You get used to it, and most of the time it's fine. Now I need to explain something. I was born and raised in this part of Southeast Alaska. I've spent more nights sleeping under our canopy of stars than I can count, and I've trekked thousands of miles through this country. Trails, riverbanks, lake shores, ridgelines, bottoms, bogs, and creeks. I've hunted moose and blacktail, heard wolves howl, and once sat in total silence while a mountain lion stared at me from 10 feet away. I say all this so you understand. I know what it's like out here. I know what it smells like, sounds like, feels like, and this wasn't that. It happened around 4:30 a.m., late spring. I was 5 miles into a 20-mile loop. First light wouldn't hit the treetops for another half hour. Sunrise wouldn't show for another hour past that. I was in a low bottom wedge between two steep ridges. The trail was narrow, muddy, and choked in thick underbrush. Young maple, old oak growth. My headlamp was low-powered, but enough to keep me moving. I'd gotten into a rhythm. One foot after the other, totally zoned out, and then crack. I stopped dead. Now let me be clear. This wasn't just a random branch breaking. It wasn't deadfall. It wasn't a snow load sliding off a fir. It wasn't a widowmaker high up in the canopy. It sounded intentional, like someone had taken a thick wooden bat and slammed it full force against a nearby tree. Not a thud, not a pop, a crack. Sharp, fast, and loud. But then everything went quiet. 4:30 in the spring means I'm the only thing moving. No birds yet, no bugs, no breeze. But now, there was something wrong in the silence, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. Mid-step I froze, just stood there half-balanced, barely breathing. And I thought crystal clear, if I hear that again, I'm turning around and getting the hell out. Why? Because whatever it was not wildlife. It felt like something had made its presence known, and if it did again, it meant it didn't want me there. I didn't hear it again, but I knew I had to move forward towards the sound. Worse, I knew the trail curved up ahead into an 180-degree turn and climbed the ridge, which meant I'd have to turn back to where the sound came from. That thought made me sick to my stomach. I waited maybe 10 minutes, just breathing into my fogged glasses. Then I slowly turned my headlamp and started walking forwards. And that is when I smelled it. Rot. Not just decay, old rot, like wet animal fur and stagnant water. Something that had been long dead and started breaking down, but not enough to fall apart. I passed a fallen log and it hit me with full force. No visible carcass, no flies, just that stench. I began to feel a cold pressure on my back, and then I heard whispering. It began faint like wind through branches, except it wasn't windy. The sounds were to my right, just beyond the brush, like a conversation. I couldn't make out the words. And then it just stopped. My skin crawled and I kept moving. Just before the switchback, I realized my headlamp was dimming. The batteries were brand new and now it was flickering like a dying candle. I checked my phone. Dead. It wouldn't even turn on. I reached the switchback and started up the ridge, trying to keep calm, trying to explain it all away. And that's when I heard footsteps. Two-legged, slow, crunching in the underbrush behind me. Every time I stopped, it stopped. Every time I moved, it moved. Always just out of view. Then came the whistle. 3 rising tones, almost playful. And that's when I ran. I don't care how many miles I planned to do, I ran that switchback with my heart slamming against my ribs so hard I could barely breathe. And that's when right on the top of the ridge I saw it. Not full on, just a glimpse to the left where the trail opens up into a clearing. A figure. Tall, unnaturally slender, pale, dressed in what looked like fur or moss. The face long, gaunt, with eyes too dark to catch the light. And then it was gone. But right after, I heard low, raspy laughter nearby, like it had been holding it in this whole time. I reached the clearing, heart pounding. First light was barely creeping through the trees. I turned around, no sound, no figure, but on a tree 10 feet off the trail, I saw something I'll never forget. A handprint, at least a foot long, scorched into the bark. 5 long fingers. I came back a few days later during daylight with a friend. We found the same tree and the print was still there, blackened into the bark. Later, I told an older Tlingit man I knew. He doesn't say much, but when I described what happened, his expression changed. He looked at me dead in the eyes and said, "That's not something you chase. That's something that lets you leave when it wants to." He said I might have walked into Kushtaka territory. I've heard of them. The land otter people, shapeshifters. Sometimes they appear to you as someone you know, sometimes as something else entirely. They lure you off path, trap your soul in between places, and if you're lucky you make it back. If not, well. He said they sometimes reside in old bogs or in low, wet ground like the bottom I passed through, and they don't like being mocked, and they don't like being seen. And when they do show themselves, it's never by accident. I asked him what the handprint meant, and he just said, "You were touched. He saw you. It knows you." I don't hike that loop anymore, not alone. Not early. And I sure as hell don't speak the name when I'm out there. Because whatever that thing was, it was done playing. This happened a few decades ago in southeast Alaska. It was late fall, and already dark when we stopped at a small gas station to grab snacks. It was just the 3 of us, my best friend driving, my fiancée in the middle, and me riding passenger in a single cab pickup. After loading up on junk food, we decided to just cruise for a bit, chat, eat, and enjoy the cool night out in the middle of nowhere. Eventually, we pulled off into a clearing by the side of a dirt road. There were no street lights, no other cars, just towering evergreen trees. We killed the engine and sat there talking, passing snacks around, and letting the window fog from our breath. At some point, my buddy brought up local legends, specifically the Kushtaka, a shape-shifting creature from local lore. If you don't know what it is, it's said to take the form of a person in need, like a crying baby or a drowning man, to lure people into the wild, and then they're never seen again. Now at the time, of course, I thought it was all BS. A cool myth, sure. But I didn't buy into any of it. So naturally, I started giving him hell over it, joking and taunting and saying stuff like, "If it's real, where is it? Tell it to come say hi." My friend didn't laugh and told me seriously to stop, and that I shouldn't mess around with things like that out here. But I kept it up, and that's when we heard it. A tapping noise like fingernails against glass just over my shoulder, right at my window. I turned to look, but there was nothing there. I figured it was just my imagination or maybe something in the trees, and since the cab light was still on, I couldn't see much of anything else outside. Then it happened again. Only this time both my fiancé and my friend heard it too. My buddy gave a nervous laugh, but he didn't look amused. The air in the cab felt heavy, like pressure was building. I joked that I had to pee, and said, "If the Kushtaka snatches me, you better come looking." I got out and did my business near the front passenger side tire. But the second I stepped outside, the atmosphere changed. The woods didn't feel empty anymore. I felt like I was being watched. So I hurried back to the truck and told them of how off it felt out there. That's when we realized something strange. We had parked unknowingly right near a very old cemetery. Not a large one, just a cluster of weathered grave markers half swallowed by moss and trees. Some of the stones were shaped like frogs, a sacred symbol in Tlingit and Haida culture. It was an eerie coincidence, if it was a coincidence. Still trying to lighten the mood and not willing to let the joke die, I say loudly, "Yeah, well, if the Dushkata crap is real, then why don't they just show up already? Come on, what are you waiting for?" I didn't even get to finish my sentence when there were two loud bangs. Two solid hits right against the front fender of the truck. It wasn't like a branch falling or something hitting the hood. It was clearly deliberate and fist-like. My friend went pale, and I mean ghostly white. In one move he turned the key and threw the truck into drive, and we peeled out of there so fast I'm surprised we didn't crash into a tree. We didn't say a word until we got back to asphalt and stopped under the first streetlight we could find. We all jumped out and checked the truck, right where we heard the hits on the front right fender. High up, there were two distinct marks, not scratches, just smudges, like where dirt had been wiped away, like something hit it with the side of its hand. There was nothing around us when it happened. No wind, no animal, no reason. I don't know what it was. I've had other paranormal experiences since, but that night was the first time something responded, like it heard me and wanted to make a point. And I haven't joked about the Kushtaka since, and I'll never go into the forests of southeast Alaska alone again. Some things are best left unprovoked. This happened in the year 2000, deep in the Mantiqueira Mountains in Brazil. If you're not familiar, it's a forested region not too different from the Appalachians, dense, ancient, wooded, foggy hills, a place where sunlight barely touches the ground. I was with 6 close friends. All of us had military backgrounds, and one of us was BOPE, which is Brazil's Special Forces Police. These guys aren't scared easily. We had planned a 4-day camping trip, something we'd done before, and as a precaution, everyone brought a firearm, pistols, hunting rifles, and a few machetes. Not overkill, just smart, considering the remoteness and the possibility of running into bandits or jaguars. Our campsite was about an hour and a half on foot from the main road. We set up camp in the afternoon, lit a fire, had drinks, grilled some food, cracked jokes, and it was just a good time all around. At 1 a.m., the weather turned. A heavy rain started pouring, killing the fire instantly. We pulled out our backup lights, which were honestly cheap and barely functional, and huddled together under a tarp. That's when things got weird. First, the cattle from the nearby farm began making a ton of noise, mooing, thrashing, panicking. Then the forest birds started shrieking as if the sun had come up. The entire forest was wide awake in chaos, and this went on for nearly an hour, and then dead silence. Not just the animals, but everything. No wind, no bugs, not even the rain seemed to make noise anymore. We felt it instantly. Something was wrong. We all loaded our weapons without saying a word and stood in a circle back to back. It was an instinct. We didn't even need to talk. Then we heard movement right on the edge of our lights in the trees. Whatever it was circling us and watching. We couldn't tell the exact direction because of the rain, but we knew we weren't alone. And of course, just to complete the horror movie checklist, one of our flashlights went out. I actually remember thinking, how cliché. Then It screamed. I still can't explain the sound. High-pitched but not human, not even animal. Like metal being stretched and torn, but layered with something that makes your bones vibrate. It lasted a full minute, and we stood there frozen. Then a bolt of lightning hit somewhere in the forest, and for a split second, the whole wood lit up like daytime. And then we saw it. It was very tall, too skinny to be human, long, unnatural limbs, black, glossy eyes. It was humanoid, but there was something wrong with it, like something trying to mimic a person and failing. It didn't look scared of us at all. That was enough, military or not. We didn't wait to find out what it wanted. We packed our gear in under a minute and ran, guns out, lights failing, slipping on mud and yelling over each other. And we didn't stop until we reached the cars. We drove straight out of there, no one saying much until we reached the main road. I didn't sleep properly for days after that. None of us talked about it much after either. One guy left the group chat entirely. We still don't know what the hell that thing was or what it wanted, but I'll never camp there again. I've seen combat, but I've never felt fear like I did that night. When I was a kid, we lived out on the borderlands between Hopi and Navajo territory, miles from town. Our house sat near a thin patch of scrubby woods, and we kept a few horses out back in a rough corral built by my grandfather. Mornings came early, especially before school, and my mum and I had a routine. Get up before sunrise, feed the horses, then she'd make coffee while I got ready. This one morning, we were out there just before dawn, still pitch black. The only light was from the stars, and they were very bright that day. As we were scattering feed and checking the trowel, I notice the horses are acting strange. Not just skittish, but spooked. All of them. They were pacing in tight circles, sweating despite the cold, ears pinned back, and nostrils flared like something was stalking them. One kicked the stall wall so hard, I thought it would splinter. My mum and I froze, thinking maybe a coyote or even a mountain lion was nearby, but we didn't hear anything like that. Instead, we heard a low hum, like a vibration in the chest, more than a sound in the ears. That's when we stepped out from under the lean-to roof to get a better look at the surroundings. Nothing on the horizon. No animals, no headlights. Then my mum looks up, dead straight above us, and goes still. I follow her gaze and see it. A massive black triangle hovering directly above us. No lights, no markings. Smooth, dark, and utterly still except for the quiet, low hum. You couldn't see it unless you were right underneath, because it was blending into the sky so well. But it was there, perfectly centered over us, and it was huge, like the size of a house, but flat and long like a blade. It didn't rotate or wobble, it just sat there, completely silent, aside from the subtle sound you could feel more than you could hear. My mum didn't say a word. She just grabbed me by the arm, yanked me back into the barn, and shoved the doors shut. There were no phones back then and no neighbors close enough to call, so she just held me and whispered to not make a sound. The horses didn't settle either. They paced and fidgeted, snorting and trembling, refusing to touch the feed. I swear even the air inside the shed felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. We waited. Maybe 3 minutes passed, but it felt like an hour. Then, slowly, the horses started to calm. One started nibbling at the hay, then another. The hum faded. Or maybe it stopped and I just didn't notice right away. When my mum finally dared to peek outside, it was gone. There was no shadow, no sound, nothing in the sky but stars and morning clouds beginning to roll in. Whatever it was, didn't leave a mark. But we never saw anything like it again. And my mum barely talks about it to this day. Says she doesn't want to think about it too hard. But I'll never forget how the thing made the woods go quiet. How the horses, these massive, strong animals, shook like leaves in the wind. Whatever it was, it didn't belong here. And I don't think it was just passing through. This happened when I was about 10, during a school field trip to a nature reserve in southwestern Ohio. I remember the feeling of wrongness from the moment I stepped into the woods. It was a place that people would go for hikes and class trips with marked trails and wildlife signs everywhere. It was quiet, not peaceful quiet, but dead quiet. There was no birdsong, no insect buzzing, just the sound of our shoes on the dirt and the occasional murmur from a teacher. At the time I didn't know why that bothered me, but now I realize forests are never supposed to be that quiet, unless there's something wrong. We were sitting on logs listening to a teacher talk about some tree species or local animal, when I saw something I can't explain. Out in the woods, maybe 75 to 100 yards away, I saw a solid black mass move quickly from one tree to another. It was 7 or 8 feet tall at least, way too big to be a deer, and way too smooth to be a bear. There were no limbs I could make out, just dense, shadow-like shapes. But it moved like it was aware of us. I blinked and looked again, but there was nothing there. I remember the temperature dropped, or maybe I just imagined it, but the air suddenly felt heavier, and I had this overwhelming feeling not to look back in the direction, like it was still watching me, just hidden behind the trees. That wasn't the only strange thing that day. Another group, a little ways down the trail, swore they heard a child crying deeper in the woods. The teacher did a quick head count, confirmed everyone was present, and chalked it up to a bird or echo. But even the adults seemed tense after that. Another kid in my group pointed out how none of the trees had birds in them. Like none. We walked for nearly 2 hours and didn't see a single bird, squirrel or chipmunk or anything. And when we got to the open meadow area for lunch, one of the chaperones took a picture of the group. Later, we looked at the photos on the bus ride home. There was a blur behind us in the tree line. Something dark, tall, and not a trick of the light. No one saw it when the picture was taken. I've tried finding the name of that reserve as an adult and I can't. Either it was renamed or they stopped letting people go there. But I don't think it was the first time something tried to make itself known to me. When I was 5, coming home from an 8-hour road trip, I saw something in the sky, this tiny grey dot hanging there. Not a plane, not moving, just watching. I looked away for a second, and when I glanced back, it was gone. Vanished. This was in a place with zero history of UFO sightings. Could have been dust on the window, but I don't think so. I felt it watching me. I don't know if these two events are remotely connected, but I know those woods. There's something in there, but I'm not sure what it is. I used to work at a fast food joint across town, and I didn't have a car at the time. So every day, I walked an hour and 10 minutes each way. It wasn't ideal, but the route was mostly quiet, through some woods, over a small bridge, and a stretch along a river and past a few scattered businesses. The most notable of them, a place called the Red Fern Diner. It was just your typical roadside breakfast joint. I'd pass it every morning without thinking twice. Until that one morning. It was around 4:50 a.m., still pitch dark, and I had just left the wooded part of the path and cut through the back parking lot of the Red Fern like I always did. It's usually dead silent back there, with no cars, no lights, just the occasional crunch of gravel under my shoe. But this time I stepped onto the parking lot and something shifted, and then something hit me like a wall. It felt aware, that's the best way I can describe it. I slowed down, completely alert now to every instinct screaming at me to run, but I didn't. I kept walking, heart pounding in my ears, and then the pain started. It began as a twinge at the top of my skull, and quickly became a blinding, stabbing migraine that shot straight down through my jaw and into my throat. My knees nearly buckled, and I felt like I was going to throw up and pass out at the same time. But worse than the pain was the presence. It was in my head, my chest, everywhere. Whatever it wasn't outside of me anymore, it was trying to get in. I don't know where the words came from, instinct maybe, desperation, or something else entirely. But I said, through clenched teeth and a shaking voice, "Leave me alone, I'm not afraid of you." I could barely get it out, but the second I said it, everything stopped. The pressure vanished. The pain ebbed like a receding tide. I was sweating and shaking, but the overwhelming presence of something invading my body had gone. I stood there for a few moments stunned, and got the hell out of there and sped walked the rest of the way to work. I had a mild headache for the rest of the shift, but nothing like what hit me back there. I've never experienced anything like that before or since. I've told a few people and someone suggested it may have been a demon or something trying to attach itself to me. I personally don't know what to believe. All that I know is that I experienced something that I cannot quite explain that morning. And I've avoided walking past the back part of the diner since. For 14 years, I lived full-time and worked weekends on an old California family cattle ranch. My cabin sat on land that had been part of a Spanish settlement long before the Oklahoma land rush. About 600 feet away, off the only paved country road for miles, there's a small community graveyard. The oldest graves date back to 1883. 2 entire families, parents and multiple children are buried there, all passing around the same time in 1886. This place has ridiculous amounts of paranormal activity. About 2 months after moving in, I had my first direct encounter. I'd just gone to bed in my king-size sleigh bed when I felt hands shove me down into the mattress twice. It was forceful enough to pin me before I scrambled free and turned on the ceiling lamp. A few weeks later, an old woman whispered something demeaning right into my ear one morning. My girlfriend at the time, my best friend, and his wife all experienced or witnessed strange things on that ranch as well. Even now, years later, I sometimes question my sanity when I think back on it. But I wasn't the only one seeing things. One night, after returning late from town, I was feeding my horse and letting my dogs out of their kennels when I saw them. 2 glowing orbs, each about the size of a softball, floating towards me from the woods beyond the back gate. As I unlocked the kennels, my dogs went crazy barking. The orbs followed me about 200 feet down a hill to my horse's water trough, swooping 8 to 10 feet over my head before flashing back up the hill. Years later, I began taking photos of orbs outside the cabin. One photo, an old vehicle frame-mounted mill saw buried in the soil near a cow path, came out especially strange. The manager had told me that saw was used to cut lumber for the original cabins and outbuildings. In the picture, you can clearly see an orb 2 or 3 feet in diameter hovering nearby. When I took the photo, I remember being irritated at mist or dust rising in front of the lens, but I hadn't actually seen any orbs with my eyes. I tried taking photos inside the graveyard, but every time my camera would shut off. Outside the fence, it worked fine. It did manage a few shots of the main gate and fence line. When I uploaded them to my laptop, the grass around the gate glowed bright yellow, like low flames. My dogs and cats weren't imagining things, neither were my friends or girlfriend, who's a registered nurse. At first, only my best friend knew what was happening. He warned me never to mention anything paranormal to his wife because of a traumatic experience she had had as a child. A few years later, during a rodeo weekend, my friend brought his wife and some cousins up to the ranch. After a long night of drinking, his wife and a few of the girls went up to my cabin to shower. 20 minutes later, she came storming back down furious, accusing me of messing with her. While she was brushing her teeth in the bathroom, the others were sitting on my bed, and they all heard something say her name loudly. That was the breaking point for me. It was confirmation that I wasn't imagining everything going on out there. Over the years, I saw 3 UFOs fly over the ranch. One night, a laser show of horizontal beams crossed the sky at high altitude. Another time, while merging onto Highway 41, I saw a chrome or highly reflective object that was missile-like flash past me just 30 feet above my truck's roofline. A few nights before the bed incident, I'd heard metallic jiggling in the attic, where ranch hands used to sleep. My dogs barked like someone was inside. When I turned on the lamp, I heard a loud slam, like a heavy dictionary hitting the floor, rattling dishes in the cupboard. Later, my dog and I crept upstairs but found nothing. The scariest incident involved my dog. My male Queenlander had died months earlier. One night after midnight, I went to bed with my female dog lying on the floor by my bedroom door. I woke up to a sound I'd never heard before. Her growling, low and fast, hackles raised and teeth bared, staring at the cabin's front door 15 feet away. Convinced someone had broken in, I crept to the closet, grabbed my firearm and waited. She stayed like that for nearly a minute, ready to attack. Then abruptly stopped and relaxed, but kept staring at the door. The next night, the exact same thing happened. That's when I realized it wasn't a person. My girlfriend came up that Friday. I warned her about the last 2 nights, and Saturday night after dinner in town, we went to bed and forgot about it. A little while later, she woke me up stiff with fear. My dog was growling again exactly like before. We waited. It passed. She later told me she was relieved when the ranch owners had to let me go a year later. She'd seen things that terrified her when she stayed alone in the cabin waiting for me to get off work, but she never told me because she thought I wouldn't believe her. Eventually, she refused to come up unless I'd be there the whole time, and didn't even notice her shift in behavior until she mentioned it years later. After the first night of being shoved down into my bed, I almost packed up and left, but I forced myself to calm down and pray out loud. The activity continued, but I was never physically touched again. I saw and experienced many bizarre things on that ranch which I cannot explain. But it wasn't just me. My friends, my animals, even visitors all felt it. I've always been a person who's been interested in spiritual things. Maybe a year ago, I finally thought I'd commit myself to shamanism. I was inexperienced, and I still am, as I haven't touched it since this story happened. I remember it clearly being a Thursday night. I had recently bought myself a book that taught me about ways and information, but this book also detailed small, non-violent rituals in which I could do shamanic things. Ever since buying this, I was pumped, as I finally had something to commit to, as I had been struggling with purpose in my life, and this helped ease that. The morning before the ritual, I had ventured out following a snaking river, where I knew the perfect spot to do my first ritual would be. I had built a fire in preparation. The ritual was that I would make an offering of incense and various food and ingredients, which was alright by me. All that was supposed to happen was that I would communicate with a fire spirit and enter a trance-like state. Then came the night of the ritual. I waited roughly until 10:30 to head out to the site that was very deep in the woods. I slung a massive drum encased in its cover across my shoulder while holding incense and some food in the other, along with materials to light the small fire. Now here is something that I must note. There was no wind whatsoever, and the sounds of night flow were present. I genuinely felt safe as I hiked through the dark, and everything seemed normal. I eventually made it to my ritual site and prepared everything. I lit the fire, prepared the food, and lit the incense too. I began to drum rhythmically to try and get myself to trance out like specified in the book. But that's when I opened my eyes and realized. The wind was suddenly here and incredibly violent, swaying my fire from side to side, to the extent flames licked the floor at points. I had specifically checked the weather, and it was supposed to be still. It had only been about 2 minutes since I had begun the ritual, and had no idea where this wind had come from. On top of this, the sound of the nightlife had become utterly silent. I heard no birds and heard no kangaroos, nothing at all. That's when the hair on my arms and legs stood straight up, and I felt incredibly unwelcome. I felt as though I was being watched, and whatever was around wanted me to meet a violent end. I quickly packed my belongings, and this intense feeling of hate seemed to chase me all the way until I got to the clearing, that is my home, upon which it felt like a weight had been lifted. Once I was home, I locked all the doors and windows, but when I looked out the window, I felt watched every time I looked towards the woods. I shut my blinds, tried to sleep, but ended up not sleeping that night. Unfortunately, that's not where it all ended. Apparently, according to the ritual, you're supposed to go and collect some of the ashes from the fire the next day, but I didn't do it as I was absolutely terrified of going into the woods again. The next night I could hear a man whistling. The whistling came from the woods, and it was not a song. The whistling came from the woods, and bore no tune I recognized, and a jaunty one at that. This went on for a few weeks, sometimes being as close as maybe 10 meters from my window, and sometimes from the edges of the woods or deep inside. After this week of creepy whistling, the whistling was replaced for one night by a singular screech-like scream of what sounded like pain coming from within the woods. This scream was woman-like, and not like a man's, which confused me. After that night, the whistling returned, and kept on going for about a month until it finally subsided. Maybe half a year has passed since the ending of that month, and I no longer hear things from the woods at night, but I'm certain there is still something watching me. Whenever I look at the woods at night, I feel that same feeling as the night of the ritual, and I feel unwelcome, and my hair stands on its ends. If I go into the woods during the day, I feel followed whenever I go back home. One comfort is that whatever is in those woods doesn't leave them, as I've gone camping in different woods and it's been completely fine. Ever since that ritual, I've not gone back to the ritual place out of fear, and I'm tentative to even go inside the woods. Ever since the incident, I've not touched shamanism in any way, shape, or form. Do you guys think I accidentally made the woods haunted? I've worked field biology jobs all over the country, some of them pretty remote. I've slept in deserts, pine forests, alpine lakes, and swamps. Once you get used to the bugs, the sleep deprivation, and the occasional existential dread at 3 a.m., it's a hell of a way to spend the summer. But there's one site, just one, that I think about a lot more than I should. Not because it was especially dangerous or difficult, but because there was something there that wasn't quite right. Let's dive in. It was 2 summers ago, and we were in the scrublands a few hours from the nearest town. It was a dense mixed forest of low pines, brush so thick you had to crawl through some of it, with occasional clearings that felt oddly deliberate, like something had trimmed them out. We were doing species survey work, herps, mostly amphibians, small mammals, scout tracking, that kind of thing. It was remote enough that we had to camp on site all week, hiking out on weekends to restock and report. There was no reception, and no roads, just a handful of us out in the middle of nowhere. The first few days were mostly uneventful, mosquitoes being our biggest bane. One of us busted our ankles. Same job as any other, sort of. We all had our own one-man tent spread out in the brush near camp base, maybe 30 yards between each person for some semblance of privacy. Then around the third or fourth night, I awoke sometime after midnight. I'm still unsure what stirred me. There wasn't a sound. I was just faintly aware that there was something wrong. That's when I realized my tent was glowing, like there was dim light coming through it. Soft, greenish light. Not flashlight bright, but more than moonlight, ambient. That isn't supposed to happen. I've been out in the woods on clear full moon nights. I've seen snow glow under starlight, or sand shine in the dunes. But this was different. This was green. Not natural green like filtered forest light, but like someone had layered an emerald lens over the whole world. I unzipped the tent and sat up, expecting a fire or maybe someone messing with a lantern. But everything, and I mean everything, was lit up in this same weird dreamlike bioluminescent green. The whole clearing shimmered like dew on glass. There was no sound, no crickets, no night birds, nothing. It didn't feel scary exactly, not at first. More like I was being observed. I sat there for a full minute, blinking into that surreal, glowing stillness. And every inch of my body was telling me to go back to sleep now. And I did, because I wasn't about to get lured into the woods by moonlight that looked like it belonged on the other side of a portal. I zipped up, rolled over, and told myself it must be some weird atmospheric bioluminescent pollen aura reflection thing, or that I was just sleep drunk. Only, it never happened anywhere else. I've never ever seen lighting like that before or since. I didn't tell the others the next day. Field crew are weird about this kind of stuff. You either joke it off or you ruin morale. But a few nights later, one of the new techs said something odd. He said he heard singing out near the tree line. Thought it was one of us listening to music, until he realized it was too far to be a speaker and too soft to really understand the words. Another guy said he kept waking up with rocks stacked outside his tent, not big ones, just little stacks of 3 right next to the zipper. Someone else's boots were moved 30 feet from where they'd left them, dry, even though they'd been placed in a dewy bush. There was a weird pattern forming, but none of us wanted to say it, so I will. It felt like fae. Not fairies with wings or glowing sprites, but old world fae. You know, forest spirits, tricksters, whatever you want to call them. And then it started to test us. On our last night there, just before dawn, I woke up again. No reason, just alert. And the forest was dark again. No glow this time. The woods were alive with whispering. Not wind, not animals, but murmurs. Moving around in a slow circle just outside of camp. Too low to understand, but too consistent to ignore. None of us talked about it in the morning. We just packed up and got the hell out. I haven't gone back since. The site got passed to another team. I hope they had a quiet summer. But I've never found a natural explanation for the light, the voices, or any of the experience on the whole. If anyone can shed some light onto this, I'd love to hear it. Things have happened out in Roy, Washington. Things my twin brother and I either blocked out or dismissed as nightmares. For years we thought we were alone in those memories, and that they were just weird dreams or tricks of a child's imagination. It wasn't until much later, after we'd moved away and grown up, that we started talking about the creepy things around our old home. and realized we'd both seen the same things. I grew up in a house at the edge of dense forest in Roy, Washington. If you've ever heard of Roy, it's a small town, barely a gas station and an elementary school in its name. Our home was about 2 miles outside the town center, down a long gravel road, lined with towering firs that kept everything shaded and quiet. At night it was pitch black. I didn't even know what light pollution was until I moved out at 18. The property backed up onto thick woods that were considered part of the Nisqually tribe land before settlers claimed the area. Strange things happened there. When I was a kid, there were moments, fleeting but sharp, that stuck with me. Like the teenage boy with a small afro and bloodied shirt I saw more than once standing at the tree line. I'd see him once a week, and he'd be gone for months, then reappear looking exactly the same. My parents always told me it was my imagination. Another time, I stumbled on a deer carcass laid out in the middle of an abandoned house, a short hike from our property. It wasn't torn apart the way coyotes or cougars leave their kill. It was just arranged, like it had been put there for someone to find. That I never told my parents. Most of these memories faded as I got older, chalked it up to an overactive childhood imagination, but one night when I was about 11 years old stands out with a clarity that still makes my skin crawl. It was early spring. I remember because the air coming through my bedroom still had that bite of chill to it. My room was your typical kid's mess with comic books piled up on a beanbag chair, action figures lined up on bookshelves, and clothes spilling out of the closet. The curtain of my windows was shut, but the windows themselves were cracked open to let in the fresh air. I woke up suddenly, not to a sound but to a feeling, like eyes were on me. It wasn't a new feeling. Sometimes I'd wake up like that, check the room and find nothing. Usually the monster turned out to be a hoodie slumped in a chair. This time, though, everything appeared normal. The curtains would shift every so often with a gust of wind, letting in a sliver of pale moonlight that cut across my floor. I flicked on my lamp just to be sure and scanned the room, but there was nothing. I checked under the bed. Nothing. Even at that age, monsters under the bed didn't scare me much, but I still looked. I switched off the lamp and lay back down. That's when the feeling returned, stronger this time, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, like something was focused on me. The air felt heavier. My eyes drifted towards the window again. I don't know what made me do it, but I got out of bed and pushed my head past the curtain so the fabric draped over the back of my head like a hood. Outside in the backyard, scattered across the grass and beyond the fence, stood figures. There were at least 10 of them, some close to the house, maybe 10 feet from the window, others further back near the fence line, half hidden in shadow. And beyond that, in the trees I could sense more, though I couldn't see them. I knew they were there. The figures were human-shaped. Their faces weren't visible, as if static or distortion blurred them out. The shapes of their heads and shoulders shifted in the moonlight like heat ripples on pavement. I couldn't see their eyes, but every single one of them was staring directly at me. Then a sound, a soft melody. One of the figures emitted a low, almost whistling tone. Another joined in, then another, passing the tune along until it looped back to the first. It wasn't garbled or chaotic. It was rhythmic, like they were speaking to one another. The sound drifted, and it made my stomach clench. I backed away from the window and ran to my parents' room. My mum sat up groggily as I tried to explain, and she told me I just had a nightmare. I begged her to look outside. My dad got up, clearly not thrilled to be woken in the middle of the night, but after hearing me, he decided to check. A neighbor had reported a break-in the week before, so he wasn't entirely dismissing me. He went downstairs to the kitchen window that overlooked the backyard, but there was nothing. He told me everything was fine and sent me back to bed. I remember as I was walking back to my room, my twin brother was stepping out of my parents' room too. his eyes wide but said nothing. By the time the sun came up, I was convinced it had all been a nightmare. Like so many other strange dreams, it slipped away into a hazy part of my memory where I couldn't be sure what was real. Fast forward almost 20 years. I'm 30 now, living hours away from Roy. My twin brother and I still keep in touch. A few days ago, he texted me out of the blue. "Do you remember people standing outside the window in the backyard just beyond the fence in the wood?" Reading that, something cold slid down my spine. The memory I'd buried for so long came rushing back. The figures, the static faces, the soft tune on the night air. I'd never told him about that, not in detail. He went on to tell me his side of it. That same night, he'd been awake when he heard me and Dad moving around. He'd gone to the window himself and caught them leaving, these people, dissipating like dirt, being swept away in the wind. By the time Dad and I made it downstairs, they were gone. He remembered the tune too. He still catches himself whistling it sometimes when he's washing dishes or driving to work. We compared notes for a while. The boy with the bloodied shirt, the deer carcass in the abandoned house, other small, strange memories we'd both had but never shared, they all lined up. The same sights, the same feelings. Years of things we dismissed as childhood nightmares were suddenly real again. We still don't know what they were. They don't feel like people or ghosts or something you could slot into a category like spirit or entity. We never saw them again after that night. Maybe they left. Maybe we just grew out of whatever it was that allowed us to see them. All I know is that for nearly 2 decades I believed I'd dreamt it, until one text message from my brother brought it all back. And now when I think about it, I can almost hear the melody again, and wonder if they're still out there. When I was in college, I got an internship with the Forest Service. Most days were quiet, almost monotonous. Patrolling hiking trails with my supervisor, clearing fallen branches, checking signage, and keeping an eye out for lost hikers. We covered a lot of ground, but one of our regular routes took us near Grandfather Mountain, a place that seemed very vast and still. The first time it happened, it was late afternoon. The air was heavy. Our boots crunched over gravel and dry leaves when out of nowhere, I heard a faint voice. "Help me." It was faint but distinct, drawn out, almost tired. It didn't sound like an animal, it was too human for that. The voice came from somewhere off the trail deep in the trees. I stopped walking. "Did you hear that?" I asked my supervisor. He didn't even glance at me. "Ignore it." His tones were clipped like he'd been through this before. That didn't sit right with me. "But what if someone's—" He cut me off without slowing his pace. "Someone went missing back here in the 60s, never found. People hear that voice all the time. It's not real." I half laughed, waiting for him to crack a smile. But his expression stayed flat, with no trace of humor, no sign of disbelief, just dismissal. I followed him, glancing over my shoulder more than once. The voice didn't call again that day, but it stuck with me. The tone, the strange distance of it, like it was both far away and yet close. Over the next few months, I heard it twice more. Each time it was exactly the same tone, the same tired cadence, drifting through the air from nowhere in particular. And each time, no matter how I turned my head or strained my eyes, it never got louder or clearer. It was as if the sound existed in a fixed place in the air. It always came when the forest was unnaturally quiet. Even now, years later, I think about it. About the idea of someone out there stuck in a loop, calling for help in an empty forest for decades, and about how my supervisor's reaction wasn't fear or surprise, but acceptance, like he'd heard it so many times that whatever it was had simply become part of the mountain scenery. In Alwar, Rajasthan, There's an old superstition about the blue bulls, the nilgai. The locals say they're not animals, but servants of something older than trees themselves. According to local legend, the nilgai can sense the restless dead. When they find human remains, they gather in a circle, moving in slow, deliberate steps until the soul is ready to be taken. They then carry the skull into the forest, a place where the spirit will be judged. The old men in the village say if the bulls see you watching, they remember your face, and one day they will circle for you. When my father was sent to Alwar for an archaeological study, my mother and I stayed with him in a small government house on the edge of the forest. The trees there were so thick they swallowed the light, and even on bright afternoons it felt dim. One misty morning, I woke up earlier than usual and looked outside. At the forest's edge, 5 blue bulls stood in the clearing. They weren't grazing. They were moving in a perfect circle around something on the ground. As I leaned closer, my stomach dropped. It was a weathered human skull. The bulls circled in silence for a while. Not a sound came from the forest. Then one bull lowered its head and gently lifted the skull to its mouth. And then they vanished into the mist. When I told one of the locals what I'd seen, his face drained of color and said one thing: "Do not watch them again. You have already been seen." It's been years since that morning, but I'm reminded sometimes of the rhythm of the hooves. I wonder if the stories are true, and if, in the end, they'll come for me. I took a trip to stay in a cabin in the middle of the woods, high up in the mountains of the city of Ranger, Georgia, USA. This neighborhood was 30 minutes up in the mountain, away from civilization, and even the cabins were spread far apart. The front deck of the cabin was completely exposed to the woods, so I acknowledged that any animals could stroll along if they pleased. But I stayed there for about a week, and me and my boyfriend sat outside on the front deck every night, very late, and at no point felt in danger. It was peaceful with fireflies out, and the sounds of crickets every night. Until the 5th night, it was eerily dark too. The moon was covered heavily. It was around midnight, and all of a sudden I didn't feel peace like I did on those other nights. The forest went completely quiet, and I felt a horrible sense of dread. I genuinely feared for my life. I sat there in a chair looking out into the dark forest, trying to rationalize and calm myself down that it was my mind playing tricks on me. But all of a sudden my boyfriend said out loud that he felt unsafe. And that's when I realized it wasn't just me. It was at that very moment that we both heard a blood-curdling scream, and we pulled out a flashlight to see what it was. Turns out it was just a grey fox. They make scary screaming sounds. The weird part was that the fox was running, and it had its ears and tails down like it was scared. This was in June, and I read that foxes scream like that in mating season, or if they're in danger. Their mating season is winter, and this happened in June, so I believe this fox was in danger, afraid of something that might well be adding to our own fear. The cabin has 3 floors, and we were able to climb out of the window and sit on the roof because we wanted to be still outside and relax. Didn't matter how high up I was, I felt something dark. Georgia doesn't really get mountain lions that often. Maybe a bear, but it didn't feel that way at all. It felt supernatural. That was the last story, everyone. I do hope you enjoyed. If you did, you can let me know. It really does mean a lot. Maybe I'll see you in the comment section. And thank you for joining me tonight. It is October. Spooky season is upon us, the best season of them all. And I will, of course, be gracing you with an even larger amount of stories this month. So I hope you're ready. But that's it from me. I'd like to extend one final thank you to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. They get some cool and exclusive perks, and if you'd like to find out what those are exactly, follow the links to find out more. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Stay awesome, guys. Good night.